Every year, stormwater pollutes Lake Simcoe by carrying harmful chemicals to it. It is mostly because the paved surface prevents water from being absorbed into the ground. As a part of climate initiative, Barrie is proposing the Stormwater Climate Action Fund. The city will change the way it collects money for stormwater management. So instead of being part of the property tax, it will be charged separately. The new billing structure will also shift the load from residential property owners to non-residential because of the large paved parking lots. Currently, residential owners contribute 75% of the total revenue. And the new model would reduce it to 54% and the rest will be paid by non-residential. The proposed rates will come into force in 2023. Councillor Gary Harvey wanted to defer the implementation by a year due to hardship caused by the pandemic on small businesses. However, Mayor Lehman insisted that the majority of the burden will fall on the big box retailers who benefited during the lockdowns. Director of Finance and Treasurer Craig Millar said it will make big contributors to change their behavior in favor of better stormwater management. Mississauga, Guelph, and Victoria have already implemented such a fund. Barrie is creating two new positions to support this new initiative. Despite his reservations, Harvey's support resulted in unanimous approval of the motion. It will come to the Council for further discussion and approval. City's project manager Ivan Chen gave the presentation about the new fund.
I'm going to borrow a bit of your time tonight to talk about the Stormwater Climate Action Fund project, which I find very exciting. I also want to quickly introduce a couple of our team members. As you've already heard, Nancy Hill, our ACOM project director, is part of our consultant. She's going to be joining us today. And then from the city of Barrie, I also have Tom Reeve, senior asset management plan coordinator, and Jacob Reed, supervisor of technical stormwater and rail operations. They'll be helping me answer some questions near the end of the presentation. All right, so what we have on the agenda today is I'll briefly go over the staff report recommendations and a quick review of our program objectives. And then I will provide a quick update about the public engagement activities that the project team had completed back in 2021 before we get into more technical side of things with the program details. And of course, we'll close off this presentation with a question and answers period if you do have any. All right, any questions about the agenda? Pretty straightforward. Perfect. Sounds good. All right. So for part of the staff report recommendations, our first recommendation is Stormwater Climate Action Fund to be implemented in 2023, with the rates being approved as part of the 2023 budget process at the existing service level standards. So I'll get into a little bit more information about what I mean by existing service level standards when we talk about the funding. The second thing we're looking for is the adoption of the SWCAF corporate policies that's outlined in Appendix A and B of the staff report. So that's the corporate policies for the program itself, as well as the credit program. And then we're also looking for approval to complete the next phase of the project, which means updating our existing water and wastewater building software, as well as building out the additional processes and engaging with our software vendors. And then last but not least, the hiring of 2 positions for the implementation and sustainment of the Stormwater Climate Action Fund. And these positions include 1 dedicated program coordinator and 1 dedicated financial billing analyst. So like I mentioned, I'd like to quickly review what we like to call the 3 pillars or the program objectives. The first pillar is really the protection of Lake Simcoe. So stormwater adds pollutants to Lake Simcoe, and with the better stormwater management means that we will have better water quality. At the same time, we like to increase the city's resiliency against the impacts of climate change, and by managing urban runoff, by safely controlling and conveying flows, as well as providing water quality treatment. And then last but not least, our last pillar is really to be more fair and equitable in terms of shifting funding from a property tax-based principle to a user fee principle, where the stormwater management costs are shifted to the heaviest contributors based on impervious areas. So I'll explain a little bit more about that later on in the presentation as well. But so some of you who may have heard the presentation before, you may recall impervious area is really just a hard surface, such as parking lots, driveways, and rooftops. So in terms of public engagement, last year, the project team completed 2 advisory group meetings, one earlier in the year on the 5th, and the second one later on in the year in September. Now, what this advisory group is, it consists of members from the community, And they have representation from neighborhood associations, from nonprofits, from conservation authorities, and even a couple of commercial property owners. And really what this group is meant to do is act as a sounding board for a project team to talk about a project, get their feedback based on their industry and based on their experience within that industry, and how to engage various public and how to share the information about the project out to the public. On top of that, we also completed 2 public engagement sessions, one on June, and then another one in October as well. Now, those public engagement sessions was with the public, so we do have those presentations recorded and available on buildingbarrie.ca. So if any of you feel like to learn more about stormwater and Stormwater Climate Action Fund, and you have some spare time, feel free to peruse over to buildingbarrie.ca and take a look at those presentations. There's lots of good information in there, even more so than what's in here as well. So as part of our public engagement, after each of those sessions, we did send out a survey to all the various participants. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I will quickly highlight a few of the survey results. And mainly one, majority of the participants agree that the stormwater cost should be equitably distributed across the community. And also vast majority do agree that the recommended stormwater user fee should be based on the impervious area. So again, that user fee principle. And again, 84%, which is quite a few, do agree that we need to have some kind of credit or rebate program to incentivize property owners to have some kind of stormwater management facility on their properties and to gain credit for that within this stormwater fee. So in addition to the survey, we also received back comments and questions during the presentation, during the public engagement sessions, but as well as even after those sessions, we did get phone calls, emails from the public. And we really summarized them and grouped them under these 4 broad categories. The first category and the feedback that I received was that to increase education of the impacts of impervious areas for new developments and the importance of green development standards. The second one, a lot of the participants did mention environmental protection for Lake Simcoe, which we found was really important because it did line up with what we consider as one of our pillars and our program objectives. So it's great to see that coming back from the public engagement and the participants there as well. The third one is the city should lead by example to modify its own properties. And last but not least, of course, again, it's in regards to the credit program and to have something in place to incentivize property owners. So now we're going to get into a bit more technical. So we're going to talk a little bit about current funding models and how that changes from the previous, which are current funding model to our impervious area funding models. So as you can see with the current tax levy revenue contributions, you can see that non-residential property owners contribute 25%, whereas residential property owners contribute 75% via the property taxes towards stormwater. Now you can see if we shift towards impervious area, now the non-residential property owners now contribute 46%, and residential property owners now contribute 54%. Now the shift, of course, is because more commercial properties or non-residential properties usually have a lot more impervious areas, such as parking lots, rooftops, things of that nature. So you can see why it's a shift from a tax to impervious area. That's why you see that shift between the 2 different types. At the same time, I'm going to talk a little bit about the funding level needs. So when I spoke about earlier about the staff report recommendation to have it at the existing service level standards, which is where we are here now at the 10 million mark. And as you may recall, earlier in 2021, we did have a stormwater asset management plan that was presented and approved by council, where it was outlined that we actually needed to be around here at 45 million. But for the purpose of this initial program, we're really only looking at the existing service level standards. So we're looking at the $10 million here. And to even contextualize the stormwater user fee a little bit more, I'll provide a little bit more information from other municipalities that have some variation of the stormwater user fee. So across Ontario, there's about 16 municipalities. And within those municipalities, you'll notice that the range is actually fairly large, but on average is about $9.34. So it ranges from $3 all the way up to $70.13. Again, that the fee amount is really dependent on what the municipality needs are, and they would charge the fees accordingly based on that. All right, so now we're going to get more technical. So now we're looking at the model recommendation. So I'll try to explain this as best as I can and as simply as I can, because I know it could get a little bit confusing because we're not talking about ratios, rates, dollars, and a bunch of math involved with it. But really, what we're recommending is that residential properties pay based on an average impervious area by property type. So you can imagine a detached residential unit seen in this picture. In Barrie, they have an average impervious area of about 236 square meters. So that would be considered our baseline unit, so our baseline DRU unit, so detached residential unit for billing purposes. So something like a townhome, they may have a similar impervious area, however, they now split into 2 units, and so on with the triplex, duplex, so on and so forth. So I'll get into examples of that in the next slide, so I'll provide more information. But just remember that we're really looking at the detached residential unit as our baseline of average impervious area. In terms of the non-residential properties, they pay based on actual impervious area. So what we mean by actual is that measured impervious area based on areas. And again, we will relate that back towards the what's the equivalent number of resident properties impervious area did that take. So for example, if you had a large commercial property and based on a measured impervious area, it turned out to be equivalent of about 16, let's say, detached residential units impervious areas, and then that's what the fee would be charged accordingly. But again, I will contextualize this a little bit more in the next couple of slides, so hopefully I'll make more sense for everybody here. And last but not least is we do recommend some kind of credit and rebate program and to incentivize and reduce the impact on the stormwater system. So we'll talk a little bit about that and what that looks like later on in this presentation as well. So when we talk about fee groupings, again, detached home equals to 1. So this is our baseline. So there's 1 unit. Now, if you look at semi-detached, factor is 0.7. So you may say, well, it's duplexes, but the area is about 0.7 ratio against 1.0 against the detached home unit. So then if you look at even the triplex and the pentaplex, the junior is now 0.5, and then now condominium is also 0.5, townhouse is 0.5. But as you increase in density, you notice that the ratio starts decreasing to 0.4 per unit. So the more dense you are, the less ratio per unit that you'd be charging relative to the one detached residential unit. So these are different product categories. And again, of course, the commercial properties themselves are measured. So then that will be factored in when we do our fee calculations. So what does that actually mean when we talk about dollars? Well, when you start looking at dollars, you'll see this table here. This table really is just for illustrative purposes only. Like I mentioned earlier, the actual rate is going to be approved as part of the 2020 budget process. But we felt it was important to include this slide in here just so we can get an understanding and contextualize how the fee and how the charges will work. So for a detached residential unit, the existing property tax contributions is about 174. Now, if we move towards impervious area unit, impervious area charge fee process, then we're looking at billing unit value of about 1. And that translates to about annual stormwater fee of about $129. So it's a slight decrease of $45. Now you can look at the duplexes. Previously existing property tax contributions 165, but you'll notice here that the ratio is 0.7 of the detached residential unit. But keep in mind, there's 2 units within that building type or that property type. So it's 0.7 times 129 times 2 gives you 181, and then so on and so forth for the condo, townhomes, and the apartments. As you can see, for the apartment, you'll see that there's a 40 here. That 40 there is just an example. It really depends what that property, how many units they have. But again, the math is the same. The way we calculate is the same. Is 0.4 times 40 times the baseline of 129 to get your ratio. Now, the main thing is the commercial property owners. You'll see the ICI. Now, this last row is not any particular property or commercial property. It's really just an average of all the commercial properties we have in Barrie. It's just to, again, illustrate what it may look like. So currently on average, a commercial property may contribute 1,138. But if we measure their impervious areas, their impervious area is actually equivalent to 16.4 of the detached residential units. Therefore, 16.4 times 129 gets you to 2,115, and there will be an increase on their stormwater fees. Now, again, as you can see, there's downs and ups because we are, again, looking at that pie chart earlier where it's a shifting of the commercial towards the residential, mainly because we're looking at impervious areas and the contributors to the stormwater. So I'll jump now to the credit program. So the credit program is something that we also have looked at because based on feedback, it is something that is important to the public. So we did speak to a variety of municipalities that do have stormwater fee and also have a credit program. And based on discussion with them and discussion within a team, we came to the same conclusion the other municipalities have come to as well. Mainly one, non-residential properties are typically larger and have more impervious areas, so the construction of the stormwater facilities will have a more significant impact on the city's stormwater system and the natural receiving environments. Essentially, what we're saying is there's more bang for your buck when we talk about stormwater facilities on those large commercial properties that have impervious areas. From a residential fee perspective, They're oftentimes too small to economically justify the construction of the on-site stormwater features that would qualify for credit. In other words, insufficient payback. Now, we started looking at a different perspective from within the city of Barrie itself. From an enforcement and administration perspective, due to the number of residential properties and the sheer number of residential properties we have in the city of Barrie, it becomes cost prohibitive when we start looking at enforcement and administration for credit programs. Now, if we look at non-residential properties, yes, there is quite a few, but at the same time, they are fewer properties. Therefore, they are more manageable in terms of the enforcement and administration of the credit program. So that's the rationale that we came up with in discussing with our municipalities, as well as with internally within our own team. And in discussing with the other municipalities, this is really what they've come up with in terms of their non-residential property credit programs. What they always have is some kind of maximum cumulative credit. So this is a cap of about 30 to 50%. And within this 30 to 50%, there are 4 different categories that you could do to earn those credits. So the first category is a runoff volume reduction. Second one is a peak flow reduction. Third is water quality treatments, and education and operation is the fourth. Now you've been asking, well, why is there such a big range between each of these different categories? So 15 to 40, 15 to 40, 10 to 30, and 5 to 15. Now the reason for that is every municipality has different focuses and different things that they want to encourage the property owners to do. Therefore, they may put more weight on, let's say, runoff volume reduction. So if a facility has something, well, if a property owner did something to reduce the runoff volume, then they may earn, let's say, 35 to 40. But water quality treatment for that municipality isn't as important. Therefore, for any facility that does water quality treatment on that property, may get 10, 15, or 20 only. But again, through all 4 of these different categories, really, they all add up to a max of 30 to 50%. So you can't exceed this cap, even though you're doing all these different categories and stormwater features. All right, so in terms of the next steps for this project team, we're hoping to bring this presentation and staff report to the General Committee for their review and approval, and then hopefully to Council for final approval of the staff report and the presentation. And if everything is approved, we're looking to move right away on the hiring and training of the recommended project resources, the 2 that we talked about at the beginning of the staff report. The reason for that is we think it's best that we do have some kind of overlap between the implementation to the launch of the fee to final sustainment. Simply because there will be knowledge transfers and they'll get a better understanding how the program came to inception and be able to help better support the public. So that's kind of how we've planned out the project if approved. In addition to that, the project team will be working on the development of a master billing file and the business processes that will be in support of that. So these business processes, everything outside of the system, and could be cross-departmental as well. And engage with our financial system vendors to complete the necessary system changes. So this is where we're taking the master billing file, feeding it into the financial system to be able to have the bill be sent out via the water and wastewater bills, and there's some system changes required for that. And of course, finally, to finalize the rates in preparation for the 2023 budget approval process, like I mentioned earlier in the staff report recommendations.
Just had a couple of questions of clarification. I'm curious whether, there's all kinds of ICI, different forms. For example, a downtown, let's say a 2 or 3 story building downtown, which takes up basically 100% of the lot, and a standalone grocery store on Yonge Street or Bayfield Street or something. Are they going to, I'm just curious, if we know, like, for example, a downtown business, how much would they be paying? Because they might have residential in the commercial. Is it only because it's what it's zoned as? It doesn't matter what the actual use is, or how does that work, first of all?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ward. I think I'm going to pass it over to Nancy. She might be able to help clarify on how we actually delineate those types of properties and help clarify that question for you.
Okay. Hi, yes. Usually you build based on land use, so not zoning, what is actually being used. And if there is a mix of commercial and residential, then it typically gets charged at the commercial rate where we actually measure it. Now, if it is a multi-story building downtown, then it may not see a significant increase, because if it's a tall building that has a large assessed value, they would have been paying quite a bit for stormwater under property taxes. And if it's a compact, so if it's tall but relatively compact and it doesn't have a large surface area, they may not see a significant increase. The properties that tend to see, commercial properties that tend to see a significant increase are those ones that maybe don't have a large assessed value. They have large sprawling surface parking lots, maybe some stores on the edge of town. Those are the ones that would more likely see an increase rather than something tall and skinny downtown.
Okay, thanks. And sort of related to that is, they gave an example of an average of 2,000 or something in the commercial. What would they be paying under this, a large grocery store, standalone grocery store? I mean, is it tens of thousands, thousands? Like, I just have no idea what kind of bill they're going to be looking at.
Yeah, I don't have them off the top of my head. I would have to, but we do take a look at individual properties and ways of seeing it. So sometimes you look at specific properties because they are, a large Walmart with a large surface parking lot. Their bill tends to be more in tens of thousands. Whereas, but then so there's some properties that an individual property doesn't get charged more, but there might be a property owner that owns multiple properties. They have a chain. So sometimes you need to look at it from a property owner perspective, because one individual property won't have a huge bill, but if you add up all the properties they own, they might see it. So we can look at it two ways. But yeah, typically you're not talking about hundreds of thousands, but we do tend to see properties that are 10,000 plus, the larger ones.
Okay, and I'm not sure if you can answer this, but would it automatically, if a commercial tenant in one of those multi-unit buildings had a lease that said they pay taxes, would this automatically be included as well, or would that have to determine whatever their lease said?
Yeah,
Mr. Millar might want to answer. I don't know. He's put on this.
Yeah. It would have to depend on what their lease said, and it would be up to each property owner how they distribute the costs amongst.
I guess my question then for Mr. Millar, is this a tax? Would they be considered a tax for their purposes or not?
No, this would be considered. No, it would not be considered tax. And that's why we do measured impervious area. And, it's been taken to court in other jurisdictions, not in Canada, but more in the States. And if people have said, oh, this is just a tax in another form, and it's always come out, when you do it based on impervious area, it's always come out and said, no, it's a user fee, it's not a tax.
Yeah, and I'll just jump on Deputy Mayor Ward as well. It's important to remember this will be billed through the wastewater bill. So okay. It would be shifted off the property tax. So depending on what their lease says on how they handle, like the property tax reduction would flow if there is one. And then it would be an allocation of how they're doing the water and wastewater in the building.
So just to tag on the correct, yeah, they're going to be using the water wastewater billing, and really would be, like Nancy mentioned, would be looking at the property owners, and depending on what the agreement is, that's between the property owner and the lease agreements.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Evan and Nancy, for the presentation and all the work to get to this point. It's, the sort of the more you drain, the more the pain kind of model. It's, we've often talked about shifting city services where possible to a user rate model that reflects how much of the service you use. And this is a way of doing that, although it's a little different than a utility or landfill pay as you throw and those sorts of things. I guess my first question is sort of a technical one. The second question is about the rollout to our community. So the technical question was, and I'm sorry, I maybe missed this, Evan, in the presentation. When you're calculating impervious area, is it always as a percentage of the property area for the non-res, or is it actually an absolute amount?
I'll answer it, but Nancy, you can feel free to jump on that as well. But it's my understanding is that commercial properties is absolute amount, so we're actually measuring those impervious areas. So it's not going to be the ratio for.
And that will be for all non-residential properties. You're going to measure the absolute amount of and so it's literally more like a rate in the sense that you're applying some sort of factor that says for every square meter of impervious surface, you generate X volume of stormwater, and the value of that is Y, and there's your bill.
Yeah, Perfectly, that's right.
and with the residential, I'm assuming, I've forgotten who did it this way, Kitchener or somebody actually attempted to map the impervious surface for residential, which I can only imagine was a very time-consuming, difficult, and probably ultimately not very valuable exercise. But it would have added, I guess, a degree of perceived fairness, because it's a slightly more pure pay-as-you-go model to say that the person who has already made an effort, or whose property functions in such a way that they only have the roof as impervious, the driveway is made impervious, whatever it is, presumably they would pay a little bit less than somebody who's paved 50% of their yard. And again, I'm sorry if I missed your comment on this, but I'm assuming you didn't try and go to that level of detail because either the aerial photography isn't high enough resolution, there's some technical reason, or was it just workload?
So thanks, Mayor Lehman. So at the end of the day, really, it's a delicate balance between administration and actually running this program and being accurate at the same time. So you're absolutely right. Like if we start looking at measuring specific, yes, we'll get lots of accuracy, but the administration of that, trying to manage that many properties that's constantly changing, potentially changing the way they pave the driveways, things like that, that could potentially have a difficulty in terms of administration and enforcement and calculations. So yes, I mean, part of the answer is workload. The part of the answer is just from a statistical perspective. I mean, it's probably better to have those average areas to be able to calculate those fees to be easier. And Nancy, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. Yes, so I think, I have to have an exact number, but I think by number of properties, 82%, I think, if I'm not correct, of Barrie's properties are residential. So when you reduce measuring individual residential properties, you take all of a sudden 82%. So you're actually only measuring 18% properties, and those are the ones that have higher impervious area. So you're getting more bang for your, way more bang for your buck. And if you throw on residential, that's a huge additional workload. The one thing though, we do a check, and what we did was we did statistical sampling of a variety of residential properties across all areas of the city of Barrie. And we took a look at, we did analysis, statistical analysis, said, okay, what are the largest homes? What are the smallest homes? 75th percentile, median, all that. And if there was a significant range, between sizes of single family, or I should say detached residential units, we would have maybe recommended going that route of having different tiers, and Mississauga did go that route. But what
so I see,
there wasn't a significant range from the biggest homes to the smallest homes, are not significant enough to justify going to that level. And when you're looking at residential properties paying $10 a month, you might, if you broke it up the tiers, it might be you'd have 3 tiers, one that pays $9, one that pays 10, and one that pays 11. And so, you make that judgment call. Yeah,
fair enough. Okay. And then the second question I had, Mr. Chair, is about the sort of communicating it to the community. You listed a number of other municipalities that have done this. I mean, we're not the first, but it's kind of a new idea for people. And anytime you pull something out on the onto a separate line or a separate bill, people tend to notice it. This is something Deputy Mayor Ward and I learned the hard way when the city's water and electricity bills were separated into 2 separate bills. People didn't pay that much attention to the 30 or 40 bucks a month when it was a line on a larger bill that was a couple $100, but pull it out, it gets more attention. Guessing people might have the same reaction to this. They don't really think about $174 of their property tax bill went to stormwater. They're just going to get a new bill and say, what's this? So how do we successfully communicate that? Are there communities, did you as part of your work look at what other communities had done to try and communicate how this works and sort of build public understanding of it? Is there a city you would point to say they did that well?
I can answer the first part of your question in terms of what other municipalities have done. And really that comes down to what we talked to is that program coordinator position that we talked a little bit about. So really that person becomes the face of the program and to really help with the education and outreach of the program once it is launched. And that's why a lot of these municipalities, I think Mississauga did it and Guelph did it as well. but they didn't really hire that position until after the fee has gone live, which is where we're coming in saying, hey, we really do want to have this program coordinator be part of the implementation process. So they get an understanding of how the program is going to be built. And again, like you said, be able to do the education and outreach out to the public to be able to get them a better understanding of it. And of course, the project team is still going to be doing a lot of communication plan throughout this year and also have a communication plan post-launch as well. Yeah. In terms of how well it worked, maybe Nancy, based on the experience with other municipalities, what have you seen that's based on what they've done and see what worked for them? But I think it really depends. Like it really depends on which municipality and the demographic that they have.
Yeah, thank you, Chair and Mayor. Yes, so the two municipalities I think have done a really good job fairly recently with implementations, I would say, is the City of Guelph and City of Victoria. And luckily we've already done some public education work as part of this consultation for this rate. And I've been pleasantly surprised how many comments we got back talking about the need to protect Lake Simcoe and the need to change how we view stormwater management. So I think that's what we need to build on. And when, if and when this rate does get introduced, to remind everyone why this is being done and the need to protect the water resources. There's already some great momentum in the city of Barrie, and I think it's a matter of building of that. And there's certainly a lot of great examples out there that we can use, one could use for an implementation.
I've just got a couple. The first one would be, obviously right now, this type of item is being funded through our wastewater. Would this new program cause wastewater rates to decrease at all?
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. So currently, technically, it's funded by property tax. So currently, the funding model is property tax in terms of the stormwater. Craig, I see you raise your hand, so maybe you want to jump in there real quick as well.
Yeah, just quickly, that is the primary funding source. I think Councillor Harvey remembers there is some small portion of water rates that are helping to fund some stormwater charges. So those water, that element would disappear on the water rate. It is fairly small. It wouldn't be a substantial decrease, but there is some small benefit there.
I guess when you look at it from a cost benefit piece, I couldn't find anywhere in the staff report where it talked about the funding source for these two new proposed positions. Would they be funded by the money coming in, or is there a different funding source anticipated?
So I'll jump in on that one, Evan. So the ask is right now, if council approves it, there is a stormwater project that has funded the project to date that is quite a bit under budget. The idea is that we would fund the positions when they come online this year directly from that project. Then when the stormwater rate goes live, the permanent funding source would be from the stormwater rate. So basically you would see, if council does approve it, you would see all else being equal, if we approved a $10 million funding source, you would see $10 million shift off the property tax. And then there would be a new budgeting, a new budget section. You'd have a stormwater rate budget and you would have $10 million and so much is going for operating, so much is paying for capital. And those positions would get funded from that source.
Okay, and I assume these two positions then are totally separate and don't intersect at all with the new climate change coordinator that we approved as in this current year's budget?
Through you, Chairman Harvey, it's completely separate. It would be one position would be really for the administration of the billing process. And then the other one is, as Evan referenced, would be more to dealing with, be the face of the program to handle the implementation of the ICI credit program. So it's completely separate from that previous position you mentioned.
The only reason I struggle with this is the timing, because we have a lot of businesses that are still struggling along. Obviously, this is going to have an impact on the businesses because I only anticipate that it's going to be this added dollar value is only going to be added on to the tenants. I can't imagine the landlords are going to eat it. What if any implications are there if we were to delay this a year to give the businesses another year to rebound. Hopefully we're in a better position when it comes to the pandemic and things of that sort.
So the implication, as Nancy has mentioned, really, it's the education and outreach to the public. We've built up a really good momentum in terms of sharing this information of the stormwater fee to the public and why it's needed and why we have it set up that way. If we delay it out a year, we would lose that momentum, but at the same time, like you said, it would provide that reprieve for the property, for the business property owners. So that's the main thing I would say. And Craig?
Yeah, I was just going to add on there. We'd probably, the longer we defer it out, we'd probably, if council chooses to go that way, we would have to probably reevaluate the measuring of the properties and some of the work that we've done. Is probably, I wouldn't say it's throwaway, but there would need to be another exercise done just to make sure that we've captured the most up-to-date average sizes and that sort of thing.
Through to you, Chair Harvey. I would also maybe add that by number, more properties will actually see a decrease than an increase. So you definitely would give a reprieve to the large paved areas, but there's some properties that would see a decrease and would delay the reprieve that they would see from actually implementing the fee.
Great, thank you.
It's revenue neutral. Yeah, this is revenue neutral, so it's a net sum game. Yeah.
Okay, great. Any further discussion from any members of council? I don't see that any other members are on other than committee members. Any further discussion? Mayor Lehman.
Yeah, if we're moving up the item and we're currently in discussion around it, I guess just the general comment I'd make around time. I think one of the strengths of the more you drain, the more the pain model is that a lot of the businesses that would be affected, to be frank, are those that have profited from the pandemic. A lot of the big box stores and the grocery stores are going to be the hardest hit. So I struggle to worry about the impact on them financially. I do think the issue around major manufacturers and I would say the same thing about warehouses. I mean, probably the biggest stormwater bills in the city that don't go to shopping malls or big box stores are going to go to warehouses. I mean, if we're sort of judging the economic impact, I would argue that those that have done the best during the pandemic happen to be the ones that this kind of system would likely charge the most to. Now, that's not a reason to do it, but I guess I'm making the argument it's not a reason to not do it because I think you are going to have, for example, some manufacturers out there who have a lot of impervious surface because they've got a big yard, they've got a big fleet, they've got big storage areas that are impervious. There, I'd have a bit of concern around us affecting our competitiveness as a location. But sorry, I've got some kids in the background here. You can probably hear them. But I do think the smaller commercial properties, the ones that we often worry about with the pandemic, the restaurants, the gyms, the individual businesses downtown, places like in small plazas, I can't see it ending up being a major burden. I guess it would be good for council to see some more math on that. But we got a bit of time because the implementation's 2023. And boy, if we're still in the same cycle of pandemic closures at this time in 2023, I imagine council may want to make a different decision just overall. But I would keep going for now because I'm less concerned that the types of businesses affected by this are those that have been heavily impacted by the pandemic. And I do think, the public support for this actually was a bit of a pleasant surprise to me. I mean, nobody in the public is going to be unhappy about their residential tax bill going down by $45. So no surprise if you own a home that you're going to like this. It's a tax reduction in exchange for a new rate that is lower than the net. So I guess those would be my comments, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to support the motion that's on the floor. I think I think many progressive municipalities have taken this step. And what's unusual for Barrie is we have a lake that all levels of government are, we get the only lake in the province that has its own piece of legislation because all levels of government care so much about it. And the federal, provincial, and local governments have all made such an effort. And I see this as part of our future ways of making the lake even cleaner and protecting it even more.
Actually, Mayor Lehman made a very good point. I was thinking the same thing, that the biggest emitters are the big box stores that have done very well. Maybe I'm not under, so maybe a point of clarity on it. If we reduce it from the property tax and then it ends up on the wastewater, a new line, would that affect the renter of a home, where the benefit of the landlord is going to, so then the new bill is going to end up on the wastewater, where a tenant wouldn't have an opportunity to, change the driveway, or like, that's the one question. And then another one was, will our planning policies reflect trying to reduce surfaces? Like if a factory that doesn't need a large parking lot, but needs a large building, there's, planning policies that states that they have to have a certain amount of parking spots and all that. Like, would we change those policies to encourage, or these are two separate issues? Planning would have to do that, and this is a totally separate thing.
Through the chair to Councillor Thompson, I can try to answer that first question. Really, the idea of the water wastewater billing is, again, just to build the property owners. So we would be able to, the idea would be to delineate that between the owners versus the tenants. So that water bill will be going to the owners instead. And depending on how the owner wants to spread that out with their tenant, that's between them and their tenants and the lease agreements that they have. In terms of the second question that you have, I think you're right. It is more of a planning question. It is out of scope for this project at this point. We're really looking at purely just for impervious areas. How do we make sure that this is built fairly, and how do we get that information out there to the public? The planning side of things and the policy side of things, that I will have to leave to the building and planning team.
Evan, maybe I can jump in here. It's Jacob Reed, Supervisor of Technical and Stormwater Operations.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Reed.
Thank you. So just to maybe answer a bit of it more from an operational perspective, when I look at the benefits of the funding model, when we look at commercial properties, the stress put on the public system from those properties is quite a lot, and the water's quite flashy when we have a storm event. And in the current model, there's no way to fund for the operations and maintenance impacts from that. And by creating the credit program, it actually encourages those commercial properties to implement greener solutions on their own property, which then benefits our public system. And to Nancy and Evan's points about it being a little bit more fair to the whole system, I think that then everyone sort of sees the benefit in it. And so a lot of the big box stores who already have stormwater management facilities on their properties would just be encouraged to be good stewards with their stormwater management. And by adding, be applying for a credit program to reduce their rates by doing something positive on their site, it's a win-win for everyone. So I just thought I'd add that in there.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Nancy.
Thank you. And to build up on what Jacob was saying, one of the biggest benefits to a credit or rebate program that other municipalities have found is that in order to apply for credit, is not only does a property have to show that they have this on their property, but they have to show it's being maintained and it's working. And some municipalities say that is the single biggest benefit of introducing a rate with a credit program, is that all of a sudden, all these systems that were designed, so these properties that have had to design with green infrastructure standards and low impact design standards that the city of Barrie is starting to introduce, is that now the city has a way of making sure that these measures perform on an ongoing basis.
Great, thank you. I did see Mr. Millar's camera on earlier. I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything further to this, Mr. Millar?
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I think Jacob and Nancy's point is very important. I know we focus a lot on the rate here and shifting it. It really is to also change behaviors, as Nancy's pointing out, and the biggest contributors, making sure that there's an incentive for them to reduce runoff where they can, and ultimately it's to save the lake. So I would big benefit to moving to this type of model.
Thanks. Just sorry, one more question. Do we know for all the comparable, is everybody billed through their water bills? Is that the standard in Ontario, or is there a variety of billing?
Through Councillor Harvey, through the chair to Deputy Mayor Ward. So it's a bit of a mix. So really, some municipalities, they bill via their property taxes, but then they find out that they really should be billing via their water bills, simply because they run into issues with properties that are tax deductible, so to speak, or that they're not necessarily having to pay the property tax, but at the same time they need to be billed for this fee, right? So they start shifting away from the property tax and more towards the water billing side of things. The other side of it too is City of Barrie is a little bit different than some of the municipalities, is that some of the municipalities actually have the utility companies do the billing for them. So that's why we started talking about that financial billing analyst position, because those municipalities, they don't need that position because they're not the ones doing the billing. But City of Barrie is unique that we're the ones that's doing the billing. So we do need to have that resource. And again, it's very different. So we're building it to unique to what we need for the city. Okay, thanks. I think it said in the report, schools are the only ones that would be exempt from this? That's correct, based on the Education Act that we have to exempt it. Everybody else, it's property tax exempt. I mean, really, at the end of the day, you can think of it, like we said, it's a user fee, the more you pay, right? So you could look at it that way.
I will support it in principle, but I still struggle with some components of this. And these are from real life stories where I've spoken to small business owners in my own ward. Just had someone reach out to me just prior to Christmas, actually. A new landlord had purchased several blocks of buildings along Brine Drive, and now that their lease was coming up for renewal, their renewal was almost triple what they were paying. And that was causing them enough of a strain. So I have some concern that people in that situation, outside of the big box stores, there's no concern with the big box stores, because when everybody else was affected by these restrictions and closures, the big box stores were still basically able to continue on as if nothing was going on. And also too, someone else that I've spoken to that's in one of our malls that has two different businesses in the same mall that are personal service related, and even right now they're at 50%. And I mean, when you've got businesses like that that are just hanging on, that's the piece that causes me concern with the timing. But I will support it in principle. But I would appreciate, I don't know if it's possible or not, Mr. Millar, to get a little bit more clarity on the type of dollar value that we would anticipate being associated to some of these small businesses, because I think that's probably our bigger concern, is how is this going to impact small business opposed to the big box stores. But with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you.
We will continue to bring you more news about climate change and other issues that matter to you. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.